Would you say, though, when in doubt, just reach out because you can always just not respond? Or what would you say?
Most definitely always reach out. And unfortunately, I knew with the amount of people that reached out to me that that was going to die down. I was shocked by just how much it dies down. So it's nice for you to do the initial reach out. I appreciated all those messages I received right away because I needed to feel surrounded by love at that point in time. So that even if I wasn't responding back to people, it still touched me. It still meant a lot.
Welcome to the Carla Rand Show, a weekly podcast designed to dig into the lives of everyday people. People who are making a positive impact, people who have risen above and overcome obstacles. Insights and stories from ordinary individuals who inspire us all towards the truly extraordinary. Here's your host.
Hey, it's Carla. So this podcast is a special podcast. A good friend of mine lost her husband this past year, and she was able to share about grief. She was able to share about what it's like to grieve and that crazy process, and also how we can help those that are grieving. This is really a really powerful podcast, and it's maybe different than some of them, and it's, it's quite somber. But if you know somebody that's grieving, or if you're grieving yourself, just hearing her experience is very powerful. So let's get into it. Right. Well, I have Darcy Robinson on the podcast with me today, and this is a really special interview. I kind of wish it could be done in like really good, happy times. It hasn't been a happy time at all for Darcy this past year. It's been very rough. But Darcy and I, we've been friends since we were in grade, 3 or 4 or something, like elementary anyways. And we went to school together, and we had lots of fun, and then we kind of lost touch. You kind of went to a different school. I went to a different school. We kind of lost touch, and then we sort of reconnected a few years back, and I was really glad that we did. And we kind of got together a couple of times, and it was just sort of like old days. So Darcy, thanks for being on here today. You've got a lot of stuff that you're going to share with us, and I'm just excited to learn from you.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here, and I hope that we can have fun talking about a not fun subject.
Right. And the subject is going to be grief because you lost your husband this past year, very unexpectedly, very suddenly. And so we're going to talk about that. Before we do, can you just tell us a little, just so people kind of know who you are, just tell us kind of where you grew up, a little bit about your childhood and stuff.
Yeah, so like you said, I grew up in Edson after moving from Saskatchewan. I went to the Christian school there for most of my elementary years, and then enjoyed the casual life of Edson, biking around and walking places. And then after I graduated from high school, moved to Edmonton and eventually moved to England for a while and found my way back to Edmonton here.
Nice. Okay. And so talk to us, because here's the thing. I'm trying to be, this good friend for you that, you've lost your husband and you're going through all this hard times. But I'm kind of like, and I've told you, I'm like, I don't always know like how to do this whole grief thing, right? Like I haven't lost somebody that's super, super close to me like that. It's suddenly and unexpectedly the way you have. So I'm kind of like, I'm trying to do this. But I think what you've learned through all of this has been super, super helpful. So could you kind of tell us a little bit about what you've learned? Well, first of all, talk to us about kind of what this year has been like for you, and then tell us about what you've kind of learned about grief and stuff through this so that we can learn from you.
Okay. Well, like you said, this year has been quite a traumatic year with a lot going on, a lot of stress before I lost my husband. And then it was a sudden death. And when I found him, there was the complete shock of that to deal with. And with that, there was COVID times to deal with too, which everybody's dealing with, but it's a little bit harder when you're dealing with grief because people don't know if they want to be around you. Should they risk it with COVID? Should they risk breaking the law, so to speak, and come over? And then try to find support groups, especially for my daughter, to help her grieve too. During this, I had to tell my 12-year-old daughter that she had just lost her father as well. There's no support groups open right now, even though they do have the right to be open, but their doors have remained closed. So that's a frustrating thing because I'd love my daughter to be able to meet other people, unfortunately, that have lost their fathers or mothers too, just so she doesn't feel so isolated in the situation. Mm-hmm. So that's basically my year, but
yeah. How would you describe your year if you could use it? Like, would you just say it's kind of been the year from hell, or like, how would you, like just brutal? Like, what are some words that you've used to describe this year?
So, yes, the year from hell, the worst time of my life for sure. Mm-hmm. December, the worst month of my life, brutal, my trauma counseling. I say that every day. I'm like, this is brutal. This is hell. So yes, it just goes on and on.
Yeah. Okay.
But
okay. Thank you. Okay, so tell us kind of what you've learned about grief. And I know that this is really rough, and I want people to know that are listening. Like Darcy and I have had this conversation before about this, right? Like, but we want to hear from you, Darcy. We want to know what it's like, and then we want to get into kind of how we can respond to people that are grieving. So just tell us, like, what's the grieving process like? What's it been like for you? And you have gone to like grief counseling, you've gone to trauma counseling, so you've learned a lot through that, right?
yeah, and I appreciate that we've talked about this before, and I appreciate that we are now giving other people a chance to hear about this. Not that I'm an expert by any means. I can just base it off of my own experience, but I've also, through my counseling, I've also spent a lot of time with talking to other widows lately to get their perspective on things too. And even though everybody's grief experience is so individual, we can't relate to what anybody else is feeling because it's their own path. But at the same time, there's a lot of things that seem to be very similar. With grief, Arabella, my daughter, and I are walking very different paths. How we express the grief is very different. But I'm also finding the cycles are very similar. So with her, she wants to talk about her daddy. She wants to remember and talk about his name and talk about all those memories and hold him close and touch things that remind her of him. And that's great. And I want to be part of that for her. But for myself, it's not that I don't want to talk about him. I do. I love when people come up to me and mention memories about him. But for me, when I get hit with those moments of grief, it's just like being hit by a 4x6. It just knocks you down, and you're flooded by this strong emotion that takes over, and the tears come, and there's no talking at those times. But yeah, so I got hit with the shock of losing my husband. And when that happens, you literally are in a state of shock. For the month of December, I was flooded with so much adrenaline or something where I was just on autopilot. I don't even remember December. Like, a person could ask me different questions, and there's things that I could tell you about it. But most of it was just getting through the day, helping my daughter say goodbye to her dad, helping her through helping go on with the things that needed to be done. But as far as taking care of myself or my needs, I can't say I was doing that much at that time, because it was just getting through each moment. That's really how a person can help somebody, is understanding that with grief, it is moment by moment. So I've talked to you before about how much I hate the question, how are you doing? So if somebody texts me and says, how are you doing? I really appreciate them reaching out to me. That's phenomenal. But then I don't know how to reply to it. How do you reply to how am I doing this moment? I might be doing okay at this moment, but the next moment I might not be doing all right. Or 5 minutes ago, I might not have been doing all right. Or what about last weekend? So yeah, I hate that question so much. And what does the person want as a response? How am I doing? Do they want me just to say fine so they can feel good that they contacted me and all is good? Or do they really want to know how I'm doing? So when you're touching base with somebody that's grieving, I find to be more specific is always better, whether it's you wanting to know things about them. So like you've started doing with me, how are you doing right this moment? Or yesterday I went for a walk with somebody and they asked, how is Arabella doing? That's a question I can easily answer. I can deal with that question. Or asking specifics like, can I come over tomorrow? Or instead of saying, what do you need done? A person doesn't know what they need help with. They barely know how to get through the day some days. But if you say specifically, can I bring supper over for you tonight? Or I'm coming over to cut your grass? Those specific things are what means the most to somebody. And those are things I remember the most about December. I was flooded by people surrounding us with love. But it was because I was so out of it that it was all people's actions. People were bringing meals over, which meant so much, because I wouldn't have been cooking for my daughter. I would have fed her, yes, but it wouldn't have been anything great or spectacular. But all people's bringing meals over meant so much. And same with the next day right afterwards. I had a friend who texted me and said, what do you take in your coffee? I'm bringing you coffee and breakfast. And that was great. I was laying in bed thinking, okay, I have to get up. I have to find a funeral home. I have to do this. So just knowing that a coffee was on its way meant so much to me. But when you do things like that, don't stick around, not in those first moments when a person's dealing with so much. Drop the coffee off or the food off, give a hug if you want, say your condolences, and then be on your way. Don't hover around them because they're not in a place to talk to you and visit. So give them their space of those first times. Just let them know that you love them, but keep your distance while they sort things out. I also had a friend with me the first day, and she was amazing. She totally took care of me, just anything I needed with whatever phone calls needed to be done at that day. She handled them for me so I could just sit back and deal with the emotions I was dealing with and getting myself ready to tell Bella what I needed to tell her. And that meant so much to me that I didn't have to be taking care of those details at that time. There is a lot that needs to be taken care of right off the bat. And that's something you don't realize ahead of time. I wouldn't have realized it. I was sitting there, I remember, with the firemen saying, what do I do now? What do I do now? And the firemen were just telling me, don't worry about it, just take care of yourself. But then victim services called me a while later, and they broke it to me. They're like, sorry that we have to tell you this, but you're going to have to find a funeral home right away, that your husband's body is going to have to be released to a funeral home in the morning. I was like, great, you're just telling me that I just lost my husband and now I have to go find a funeral home. So that is my recommendation to somebody that thinks that grief isn't going to happen to them, or not wanting to think about the possibility of losing their spouse. I don't expect a person to plan ahead and do the funeral planning, but little details like that, where if you live in Edson, you may only have one option, but here in the city, there's tons of options. So at that point in time, I wouldn't have known where to choose. I think I would probably ended up doing a Google search and went with the first funeral home that came up. But luckily, well, not luckily, I guess, unfortunately for my friend, I had a friend that has experienced loss in her life and has dealt with a funeral home. So I was able to text her and ask her recommendation, and I just went with that. I was not in a state to be shopping around by any means. When I called them, they gave me the details, but it's like, yeah, whatever, just go ahead. And I hear a lot of funeral homes do take advantage of grieving people. And I can see that because in the following days when I had to go and make arrangements with them, I don't remember the papers that I signed in front of me. But luckily, the funeral home I went with was a good funeral home that I would highly recommend if anybody needs a recommendation, because they were tired of funeral homes taking advantage of grieving people.
So how do they take advantage of them? Do you mean like just overcharging or just having them sign their life away kind of thing, or what?
Yes, it's very common for them to overcharge. Funerals can be super expensive. Burial costs or cremation costs are even super expensive. There's so many costs. It's unfortunate because you've lost somebody you love so much, and now you have this major bill that you have to pay that you weren't expecting. There's so many people wanting to help out afterwards, and there's so many ways that they can help out. And there was so many ways that people did help me out that I truly appreciate. Like I touched on already, the meals that people dropped off and arranged that I didn't have to do anything. That was incredible. There was financial gifts, which I truly appreciate. And those, a person thinks, why does a person need financial gifts? A person thinks or assumes that maybe there was a life insurance policy. Well, we don't know if there was a life insurance policy or not when somebody's passed away. And please don't ask that question. I've been asked that question lots, and I've talked to lots of other widows that get asked that question all the time, or people just talk about it and say, oh, I know you got a life insurance policy. I know you have money now, but we don't know what kind of bills a person has or what's coming up. But yes, with those financial gifts a person gives, that those go towards the funeral expenses, or even helping cover the eating out while they're not cooking for those until they get their stuff back going and stuff. All those things do really touch a person.
Yeah, as I'm listening to it, it's hard to just like remain, totally normal. Like it does help that we've talked about this, Darcy, quite a bit. So it's not the first time I'm hearing it, but it does, choke a person up just to imagine all of this stuff. But I'm really glad you're sharing it, because most people don't know exactly what's all involved. But people that are listening right now, that would be like, okay, I've been through that. I get that. Like, I know what that's like. but how often do we kind of get to share it like this where people can really pick up on it? So thank you for sharing it, Darcy. I know it's not like really an easy thing to share. So you said like when things first happened, when you first found out about the loss, and you said just bring something by and leave because you just got so much on your mind. When were you like, and I know this is your experience, but when were you kind of at the point where you were like, you know what, I would like people to kind of stick around? Was it kind of a week later, a couple weeks later? Like, and I know it's different for everyone, but just for you, what was it like?
Yeah, of course it would be different for everybody. For me personally, that first week I was in such a cloud. I had friends that I was really close with. They were texting me and saying, can I talk to you? It's like our family members that wanted to, of course, reach out to me, but I was like, no, I can't talk to anybody. That first week was off limits. After the first week, then I was able to open up a little bit more and start communicating with people again. And then, so that would take you to week 2. And then after that, then I was starting to want to visit a little bit more with people and be around people when they would drop off things. Was willing to invite them in then and sit down and have a cup of coffee with them and just enjoy being around people again. But yes, that first week, all I could reply back to people is, I can't speak to you right now, but thank you. I appreciate your kind words. That was the most I could handle at that point in time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it's hard to know, right? Like it's hard to know. But I think, would you say though, when in doubt, just reach out because you can always just not respond? Or what would you say?
Most definitely always reach out. And unfortunately, I knew with the amount of people that reached out to me that was going to die down. I was shocked by just how much it dies down. So it's nice for you to do the initial reach out. I appreciated all those messages I received right away because I needed to feel surrounded by love at that point in time. So that even if I wasn't responding back to people, it still touched me. It still meant a lot. But as time goes on, a person's now left with this hole in their heart where their spouse, their husband, their wife used to be. It's quiet now. And each day they wake up with this grief. Well, some people aren't sleeping throughout the night. I have sleeping meds to help me with that. But anyways, yeah, that grief is always there. People are scared to approach you as time goes on because they feel like that if they approach you and say, I'm sorry for your loss, now 3 months later, if they haven't talked to you before, they feel awkward. They feel like maybe they're reminding you of something or bringing up something that you're moving on from. It's always there. It's always a part of your life. You're not moving on from it. They're not reminding you of something. If they come up and mention your husband now to you 3, 5, 6 months later, you're not going to be, oh, sorry, I forgot about that. No, it's right there on your mind constantly. So we appreciate. Be awkward, always be awkward. It may feel awkward to the person approaching you. It may be a subject that they're not comfortable with and they don't know what to say. But that was things I really appreciate when people just came up to me and just said, hey, look, I know you're hurting. I don't understand what you're feeling, but I really don't know what to say. I could see that was uncomfortable for them, but it just meant so much to me that they put themselves out and they came up and approached me. One widow recently said she felt like people felt like widowhood was contagious because you see people walking the other way or turning around when they see you because they're worried. What do I say to them? How do I approach the subject? So they don't come up to you. So just be awkward, take the step. And when you text them, somebody that's grieving and they don't respond, don't take that as an insult so that they didn't want to speak to you. There's times where I receive text messages that I love, but I may be helping my daughter grieve right at that moment, so I can't respond. And then with my brain and the way it's been lately in this fog that you have, you think maybe you did respond and it goes untouched. So try again another day. Keep reaching out to them. And don't put it on the person that's grieving. Those comments saying, contact me if you need anything, those don't work. If the person's on the floor crying their eyes out or laying in bed unable to get out in the day, chances are very slim that they're going to send you a text and say, hey, my life sucks right now. I can't do this. I need help. They need somebody saying, hey, I'm here for you. Let's do this together. So if you want to be there for the person, then unfortunately it's on you. You're going to have to make the effort for them and be there for them because they're not going to come out and reach out to you. And really, it's not really fair to put it on the grieving person because they already have so much that they're going through. And now they feel that there's a burden on them where they feel like they have to stay in contact with a person.
Yeah, and I mean, again, this is hard stuff to talk about, and this is kind of hard stuff for some people to hear, because it's kind of like, oh wow, like that's kind of, and again, it's your experience, but I think you share what probably a lot of people would feel when they go through this kind of thing. So you mentioned that you don't appreciate it, and I've heard other people say that they don't mind it. So maybe it just depends on the kind of type of person. But you don't like it when people just say, "Hey, how are you doing?" Because it's so broad. You're like how am I doing right now? How was I doing yesterday? And you don't want to just say, "Look, I feel like heck all the time," because that's then they're kind of like, well, what do I do with that? But what would somebody say? What would be something that would be helpful if they say they saw you in the grocery store and they were tempted to just turn away because they didn't know what to say? What are some examples of maybe some things that you would really appreciate them to say?
It's a little bit hard when you just see somebody in a grocery store, because that's such a brief moment. And usually when we do approach somebody in a grocery store, it's always the, hey, how are you doing? That's basically our hellos here in Canada.
Yeah.
But I went for a walk yesterday with somebody, and they didn't ask me once how I was doing. We just talked, just like you would talk with a friend. And I loved the ease of that. I loved just being next to somebody and feeling free. Because if I want to talk about things and I'm in a conversation with you, if you and I are just hanging out and I feel comfortable with you, I'm going to open up and share how I'm doing with you, regardless if you specifically ask me. Because like I said, it's always right there. It's on our hearts. It's on our brains. It's just going to flow out of our mouths if you've made us feel comfortable to do so. So just being there for the person. And sometimes the person doesn't want to talk. So if you just let them know that they have a safe spot with you, if you just say, hey, I'm here for you. If you want to talk, talk. If you don't want to talk, we can just hang out. We can just be there together. Or I can tell you stories. I know, Carlo, I think one of the first times you and I hung out afterwards, you did that to me. You said, if you want to talk, great. But I'm perfectly fine talking about myself right now if you just want to listen. But that's great, because if sometimes we just may not be in the mood to talk about what we're going through either. And it might be just fun to not great to just be able to talk about normal life stuff. But it's also great for somebody to come up to you and tell you a loving memory that they have of your spouse. Say, hey, I was just thinking of your spouse today and remembering when him and I played golf together. That touches you. People are scared to do that because they are scared that's going to make you cry. But it warms your heart. And even if a few tears do roll down your cheeks, those tears are different. Those are tears that just touch your heart and mean something to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay, so this is really helpful. So you've been able to share kind of like what it was like for you kind of when you first were grieving, and then kind of like afterwards, how people, like you said, in your experience, it's not that people sort of dropped off. It's kind of like it just suddenly ended for you, right? Like first of all, there's all these text messages, all these, things coming in, and then boom, it's kind of like everyone just kind of is gone now. Maybe not, we won't say everyone, but most everyone. Like when that happens, what does that do to you? Do you suddenly feel like you're alone? Is it kind of a relief because you're like, okay, I get a break? Like, just what's sort of that thought process?
No, it's not a relief, not at all, because you have this major shock in your life where you already now feel so alone in so many ways. You just lost somebody that was very significant to you, and when it's your spouse, you're used to those conversations. You're used to reaching out throughout the day and texting them random things about how your day is going on, or you're used to coming home and just chit-chatting about all kinds of stuff. So now all that's taken away from you. And when you have a child involved, you're also feeling that extra loneliness of now you're raising this child completely alone. You don't have another person that's invested in your child the same way as another parent is. When you go to sporting events for your child, ballet recitals, there isn't anybody else cheering that child on the same way that you would be. So yeah, there's such isolation feeling. And then when everybody most people, like you said, not everybody, but when there is that abandonment feeling, it's scary. You're like, oh wow, now I am alone. Now I am doing this all by myself. Whereas before, when you at least feel like you have people backing you, it does give you strength. It does help you feel like, I'm not quite as alone. I can do this. I can keep picking up each day. But when your phone all of a sudden dies down, it's like, oh, how am I going to keep doing this if I have to do all this by myself? If I have to get myself through this grief and help my child through theirs and help parent my child all alone and stuff. So yeah, it does produce some scary feelings in you. So I would encourage people to keep reaching out to you. Don't just say, oh, the funeral's done now and they must be done grieving. No, this is part of their life. And they have all these moments coming up. The first day that their kid goes to school, the first birthday, the first anniversary. For me, it's been anniversaries every month, and I feel like that's the case with most grievers too. There's moments that they just keep remembering. So when you're there for those moments, that means a lot to them. I hear some people are scared to text, message them, or call them on, say, the first anniversary, the first death. The first year, because they're like, oh, maybe the person's not thinking about it and I don't want to remind them about it. Like I said, they're thinking about it. It's there. So they appreciate you reaching out and contacting them and being there for them on those hard moments. And I also hear couples that hung out with other couples. These widows aren't getting those couple invites anymore because people feel it's awkward. We used to hang out together as a couple. So now people are feeling like they lost their group of friends too because they've lost their couple friends. So now they're encountering so much more loss than what they had to encounter as just losing their spouse. They're now grieving the loss of their friends too that they had. So keep inviting them out to things. People are, but at the same time, don't put any expectations on those invites. Be casual about it. Say, hey, I would love for you to come to this gathering I'm holding Friday night, but also giving them out too if you're booking too far advance, because what I may be fine to do tomorrow night, I may not be fine to do next Thursday night. So if you make it okay for them to cancel if they really don't feel up to it, that'll mean a lot to them, because like I said, if you keep taking the burden off them in as many ways as possible, that really helps relieve things. When you're putting normal social interaction burdens on them, it's added stress where it's like, oh, I don't feel up to doing this anymore, but now I don't want to let the person down. I don't want to tell them that I don't feel up to doing it. Now that's something else that they're having to go through. So just being there for them, but keeping things as easy on them as possible means so much.
Mm. Yeah, no, that's a really good point. So a couple of things that I just wanted to say. Okay, so you talked about the importance of having a will, right? So if you don't have a will and you're listening, you'll go get a will, make it happen. Actually, I was talking to Jason when I got home after. I was like, we have to update our will, because we did it a while ago, but I don't think all of our kids were born yet. So we're like, we got to go update that, figure things out so that if something does happen, it just make it as hopefully as easy as possible for whoever's left to kind of deal with the loss, right? So that's good. Also counseling. So we didn't talk a lot about that. Would you recommend counseling, grief counseling, whatever, to someone who's experienced loss? What's it been like for you?
Yes. So like you said, definitely get the will. We had a will in order, so I was good that way. And that made cleaning up the estates so much easier, which is nice because you're dealing with so much grief and so much stress that any amount of stress that can be taken off of you at the time really helps out. There was so many incidents that you would have even imagined that I had to send out a will to people. It is necessary it can be done without. I'm not saying can't, but just makes life easier at that point of time. As far as the counseling goes, yes, I highly recommend it. Some people thought I did the grief counseling too soon. I guess that has to be left up to the person when they feel it's the right time for them. For me personally, I wanted to get on healing. I didn't want to be set in this trap where I felt stuck. I wanted to feel like I was moving forward and making progress. So I set out to do the counseling as relatively soon as I could to get the help that I could to help process the grief I was feeling. With my grief counseling, one thing that they addressed right off the bat, actually addressed it a few times with me, is that grief adds up. So if you have a loss in your life, and they had talked about all losses, so it's not just a major loss of a spouse or a child, but say you lost your grandparent or you had a breakup or a divorce, and you don't handle that grief, you don't handle that loss, and then there's another loss that happens in your life, the loss from the you acquired beforehand now gets added to that loss. So now you're grieving twice as hard as you would have if you would have dealt with the first grief. So they talked about how important it is to really process and deal with each grief in our life as it happens. They were addressing how everybody says time heals all, but she was talking about how if time heals all, then there would be no need for counseling because we'd all be walking around healed eventually. So it is important to do the work. And it's not fun work. It's not. It was hard. And the trauma counseling is even worse. But I just trust that it's all going to benefit me in the end. And I will have healed through it all in a healthy way so that down the road I can be the healthy mom that my daughter deserves and not dealing with things in an unhealthy manner down later on in my life.
Yeah. I think, yeah, that's so good. I know counseling, like some people, it doesn't work. But I mean, like, it's probably going to do something for you. And like you said, you want to be moving forward, right? You don't want to just sit there stuck being like, I don't even know how to get out of bed today, right? Whereas if you go to someone who's trained in this, who's had like a lot of experience in this, they know the questions to ask. They know how to get you out of that, right? As long as you're willing to just go show up and do your best. And like you said, it can be brutal, right? Like, especially your trauma counseling, like that's just like probably one of the worst things that you have to do, but it's also part of you moving forward. So, you know, like sometimes you just got to do what you got to do, whether it's easy or not, right?
Exactly. And there's little things that just a counselor can say to you that don't seem mind-blowing, but they just make a world of difference. For me, I guess I'm a pretty perfectionist type person in the sense of what I expect from myself. I'm quite driven. I expect myself to accomplish a lot. So I was kind of pushing myself, I guess, forward with the grief process and expecting myself to be further along, expecting myself to be able to pick up with life in more of a normal way, get back to cooking, get back to cleaning and organizing, and get back to my business, and getting back to homeschooling and teaching my daughter again. Why aren't I able to do this stuff anymore? I wasn't understanding how this widow fog, basically they call it, works in your brain, where it just takes over your brain and you can't function. But even just my counselor telling me, hey, it's only been a few months yet. You're expecting too much of yourself. You're doing great. Even just simple words like that, just really, it's like, oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I got this. Or just my recent counseling session where I ended up just talking things through a lot more than what she had planned, because it was just things I was experiencing, if didn't feel normal to me, but able to just speak it out and have somebody else listen and just tell you back what you were already saying. Now all of a sudden it does feel okay. It's like, oh yes, okay, this is making sense. Grief is a strange thing, because one moment you do feel okay and you feel like you're moving forward in life, and then all of a sudden you're hit again and taken back to as if it just happened. And you're wondering, how did I end up back here again? I thought I was moving forward. I thought I was okay. But that's just how it works. It's all over the place. It's not a straight line or a steady climb. It's like a loop-de-loop roller coaster.
Yeah, so I could reach out to you one day or maybe visit you or whatever, and you're like, yeah, you know, and I'm like, oh, Darcy's doing great, right? Oh, she's good to go. And then the next day you might suddenly hit a wall and be, you know, laying on the floor crying or whatever and just feeling horrible, like as if it just happened, like you said, right? So I think that's where, you know, people that are wondering how to respond to a grieving person. And that's what I text you now. I'm like, how are you doing right now? Like right this second, right? Because I kind of want to just say, how are you doing? Well, yeah, it depends. But is there anything, Darcy, like I kind of want to wrap this up fairly soon, but I want to make sure that I'm not missing anything. Is there any kind of thing that you would like people to know about grief or anything that you want to share still?
Off the top of my head, I would say when you do communicate with people and do reach out to somebody that's grieving, it's so nice that people want to feel the need to relate to you, but don't. Just even if you've had a specific experience that's very similar to theirs, everybody's grief is different and what they're experiencing is different. even though there's a lot of similarities between grief, we cannot say, I know how you're feeling. I understand how you're feeling. You don't understand how they're feeling. So even if you've lost your husband too, or lost a child like the person you're talking to, you can't say, I know how you're feeling. And that right there, that's probably the best thing you can say to somebody, is just to go up to them and say, hey, look, I don't know how you're feeling right now, but I am here for you. Because if you're going on about how you lost your cat and how you understand grief, and they're thinking, how does this relate to me losing the person I've been married to for how many years, then now they're thinking thoughts in their head where they want to stand up to you and tell you, no, you don't understand what I'm feeling. Usually they're probably a nice person, not going to tell you that. But now, instead of comforting them, you've now alienated them. So if you just nicely keep your mouth shut and just be there without words and just say, hey, I'm here for you. Your silence means so much more than your words could say.
That's such a good point. And it's good. It was really good for me to kind of hear you say that, because that's always what I think, that's a natural human inclination, right? We're thinking about ourselves. You're grieving. Oh, I know what, I've been grieving before too. Let me tell you about my grief. And then somehow we think in this messed up way that somehow that's going to comfort the grieving person, and it doesn't. What you could do instead is listen, like you said, just be quiet and listen, but use your experience with grief to help you understand that person, but not to say that you understand that person, right? Like your experience with grief, you can say, wow, like what she's saying, I kind of get that. That's going to help me understand her, but I don't necessarily need to tell her that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Draw on yourself and feel those emotions. I was speaking to some widows recently too, where they were feeling that when their friends talk to them, their friends are kind of lacking that emotion. They're sad that they see people grieving celebrities with more emotions than what the person is now trying to comfort them with. So show those emotions, show that you care about them, but don't tell them that your experience or how you know exactly how they're feeling, because those are things that you can't say, that you don't know exactly what's going on in their head right then.
Mm-hmm. I think that's just a good thing to note. Like, I know a lot of times when I'm talking to somebody and they're sharing, I'm like, oh, I kind of want to, but then I'm like, no, Carly, use that experience that you had and that relationship that you can draw with this person. Use that just to listen really well so that you can fully understand what they're experiencing. Don't use this as an opportunity to talk about yourself, right? Because like you said, it's a real gift, I think, to just give people our ear, our undivided attention, and to really try, like actually make an effort to understand, like when you're talking, like try to understand, what would that feel like? What exactly is Darcy going through? Just to really try to understand. I think that's such a gift. Would you agree?
I do agree. And it's something I've had to learn too during this process, because I know I probably beforehand would have been prone to going up to somebody and be like, hey, whoa, I lost my husband too. Let's talk about this. But no, that's not going to help the person that I'm wanting to help. There's been a lot that I've learned during this time, not just what I like and don't like and things like that, but just seeing how I used to handle a grieving person. It's all things that I would have done myself. I would have walked up to somebody and said probably something similar to, hey, I can relate to what you're feeling. Or same with not approaching somebody down the road. I would have felt like that. I would have been like, oh, it's 3 months and I haven't mailed that sympathy card yet. There's no point in me mailing it now. But really now I know that 3 months down the road, I'd be touched if I still received a sympathy card that somebody didn't send out, because it's great to know somebody's thinking about me still. So it's been a learning process for me too. And that's why I hope that by me doing things like this, that I can help people when they're experiencing grief, that they can feel, hey, this is normal. And that's where I recommend even those Facebook groups or support groups, so they can talk to other people and realize that the process of grief is hard, really hard. But if you're surrounded by people that care for you, that helps. And what you're feeling is normal. It's normal to cry. It's normal to hurt. It sucks, but it's all part of it. And even how people respond to people that are grieving. We don't know how to handle people that are grieving. It's hard. It's tricky. It's awkward. But be awkward. Keep trying. Keep helping them. Be there for them, because it does make a difference. Even if they're not responding, you feel like, hey, I messaged them. I guess they don't care. No, keep trying. They do care. They do appreciate those messages, and they do appreciate those invites. Even if they turn you down, they appreciate it and they want those invites. Keep trying. Don't give up. Be there for them. They need you.
Thank you. Well, Darcy, thank you so much for sharing today. I just feel like mad. Like I'm just soaking this up. I just think we can learn so much, and and not everybody would be like, hey, pick me. I want to share all the stuff about grief. But I just so appreciate that you're willing to do that, because I know that there's the point that you're in right now. We can learn so much from you, even though it's so hard for you. So thank you so much, Darcy.
You're welcome. I hope it helps somebody.
I'm sure it will. I'm totally confident that it will. This episode is brought to you by my company, Power Fitness Online. We are a tight-knit fitness community, and we guide you every step of the way to get fit and stay fit through our live workouts, nutrition coaching, and incredible support team. Go to powerfitnessedson.com to learn more. Thank you for tuning into the podcast today. If you enjoyed it, please leave a positive review on Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Music, or wherever you're listening. And if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, I would love to see your comments. I would love to know what you think about this episode and interact with you. I love hearing from you. Once again, I'm Carla Rand, and this is The Carla Rand Show, and I can't wait to see you next week for our next episode.